Good morning. I can hardly believe that a prophet has no honor in his own country. And I'm sure that your being here this morning is the recognition of your recognition of the message of the infinite way. It's good to be back in Hawaii. It's good to be back here with you. It has been a long trip, 5.5 months, and it started out to be only 7 months. Excuse me, it started out to be only 7 weeks. But as it got near that 7th week, there was an urge and a push that sent us on over into Texas and Oklahoma and Chicago. And this same experience that I couldn't account for, couldn't give any reason for, continued all the way across to New York, and then we were invited to Washington, D.C. and back to New York. And without any preparation, without any halls, without any notices to students, we just made the jump over to England, expecting to be there about 2 weeks and come home. It turned into 2 months, and then the continent opened. Instead of my usual visit to Munich in Germany, this trip we had 3 cities, Munich, Berlin, and Frankfurt. We did take a day to visit East Berlin. And I would like to make the suggestion, if there are any among you who are inclined to be a little bit liberal in your politics, do, at the first opportunity, visit East Berlin and see how the socialist people live. It might turn you into a capitalist very quickly. It's really an entire city of prison. You're not just in a prison building, you're in a whole city of prison buildings. But I'm sure you'll learn more about that in history. At any rate, it was an interesting experience, because we do have a few students in East Berlin, although we didn't meet them, trying to demonstrate freedom in the midst of prison. The fact that the infinite way continues to spread of itself might not have significance, but the fact that it is spreading in the way that it is has a very deep significance. Perhaps that could best be illustrated by telling you that we did not go to Hamburg in Germany, but that 12 Infinite Way students from Hamburg came to Frankfurt to tell us that there are nearly 300 students of the Infinite Way in Hamburg. That is what I mean by the way of its spreading. We had no way of knowing this in advance. We had no way of knowing, we had no way of knowing all across Germany of the amount of students that were there, or Sweden or Holland on this trip. The unfoldment seems to be coming from within, and in no spectacular way, but in a way certainly that shows that inside of consciousness there is a stirring and a reaching out, and that this stirring that is going on will never be satisfied until every individual who feels this urge reaches that center within themselves. For thousands of years, men and women have sought the Holy Grail, or have sought the mystery of life, the secrets behind the visible scene. But more particularly, they have sought this for their own sakes, in order to find an inner peace, an inner rest, to satisfy something within us that is not satisfied. I think that is true of every real seeker, that their first thought is really to come to a place within themselves where they can be at peace, where they can find rest and a solution for their individual problems. Each, of course, finds that particular path which is best for them. There is no one path yet discovered that can meet the needs of everyone on earth. Each one has something within themselves that will respond to a spiritual message, but not always to the same spiritual message. And it is for this reason that in our search we may seek on many paths, we may seek through many approaches to truth, and if we are wise, we will continue until we find that particular one that is really our spiritual home. And that one will not be the same for all of us. When we do find our particular spiritual home, then is the time, like in marriage, to forsake all others and cling to that one until it yields the fruitage of the Spirit. We little realize when we start out on this path that the battle is not with this world. The battle really is with ourselves and within ourselves, because we are our own worst enemies. This is inevitable. We were all born into a material sense of existence, and this means that our minds are centered on those very things that are aimed to destroy our peace. Our entire goals have been those that ultimately must destroy us. You see evidence of this in the scientific world, where the search for scientific truth has eventually led to the great discovery that can do nothing more nor less than destroy not only the discoverers, but all of the rest of the world as well. You find this in the economic world, where the search for economic security, and that is the only reason that anyone is ever interested in economics, is for the purpose of security, and the very search has led to forms of economy which eventually must destroy all of those who engage in it. We ourselves are trained from birth to look out into this material world and seek its mysteries, even when we realize from a study of history that we are seeking to open another Pandora's box. It is only when the urge comes to seek in the spiritual realm, to seek within ourselves, that we do realize that the enemy that has to be overcome is ourselves. that when the Master says, I have overcome the world, he did not mean that he had overcome Caesar, for he hadn't, nor had he overcome the Hebrew temple and its wickedness, for he hadn't. As a matter of fact, there is no sign that the Master ever overcame anything in this world, or any condition in this world, or any evil in this world. All that he overcame was himself. He did eventually rise to where the human of him had been subjugated, and the spiritual nature of him had come to the surface, and he had really overcome himself to the point where he could not even indulge hatred for enemies. He could not indulge desire for revenge upon those who persecuted him. He had overcome all of this within himself. He had not overcome enemies. He had not even overcome enmity. He had overcome these things within himself, and above all things, he had overcome reaction to the events of the world, so that, as Paul later phrased it, none of these things move me. None of these things move me. I live, yet not I. There is a spirit that dwells in me, and it is the bread of life to me, and the wine and the water, and I live by the grace of this presence. In our experience, we discover, I would call it a mystery. We discover that one of our greatest battles in life is with God. We are always fighting God, every one of us. We do not recognize it in that way until we begin to really turn within ourselves in introspection and meditation and perceive that, in a manner of speaking, we're kind of mad at God. God, why is this happening to me? God, why is there no solution to my problem? God, how can you be permitting this dictatorship, this threat to world peace, and be doing nothing about it? Father, how can you continue permitting children to be born in sin and sickness and lack? And you'll find how much of your life is spent in mentally fighting God on these points, resenting God, resenting the fact that God seemingly permits the evils of this world. Watch how many times the thought comes into your own mind as to why is this happening to me, and then sort of looking out of one eye at God to see why God isn't doing something about it at the moment, or what can we do to get God to do something to it? How shall we interest God in my problems? I realize that this is all a part of human nature. The reason it is a part of human nature is an age-old belief or teaching to the effect that God can do something about the human scene. Since we have been taught that God can do something about it, of course the question has to arise, why isn't God doing something about it? It takes a long, long time to realize that you cannot bring God to this world that you have to overcome this world and lift yourself to God's world in order to find the harmony, the peace that we are seeking. Do you realize to what extent we are trying to mold God to our will? Do you realize to what extent we are hoping that God will fulfill our desires? And I hope that you who are studying the infinite way will realize that you never will mold God to your desires, nor get God to do your bidding, nor have God fulfill your earthly desires. For this can never be. There is a way, if the human world is our ambition and our aim, there is a way to dig out of our own minds the success that we seek, the glory or the fame, but this has no relationship to God. If you are on the spiritual path, one of the first things you will learn is that you have to give up your will that the will of God may be done. That you have to give up your particular way in order that the spiritual way may be revealed. You learn very quickly on this path that success only comes in proportion to our ability to surrender, to yield ourselves, to yield our desires. We, of course, in our wisdom, know what we need, know what we would like to achieve, know what hopes we have of human accomplishment. But remember that none of this is a part of the divine plan, and that it is only as we learn to surrender, as we learn to yield, that we can come into a place in consciousness where we are listening. Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth, and really begin to ask for guidance, for spiritual guidance, for spiritual support, for spiritual unfoldment, for spiritual demonstration. God is spirit, and the universe of God is spiritual. And the way that we can bring ourselves into at one-ment with the spiritual universe, the spiritual kingdom, the kingdom of God that is within us, is in this very adoption of the listening attitude, in this very attitude of surrender. It does not always follow that we will be taken out of our present human way of life. It doesn't always follow that we give up our present occupation or profession. As a rule, the very first thing that happens is that a divine influence comes into the very human work that we are doing, that some spiritual strength is given to us, or spiritual wisdom, and that makes it possible for us to continue what we are doing, but do it more successfully, more joyously, more profitably. It is only as our lives become more and more sunk in God that there is a possibility that we will be taken from our present activity and moved into something of a different nature. And even here, it isn't possible to outline what that is. Sometimes we are taken out of our business life and brought into the spiritual world. But I have also seen that some have been taken out of the business life and moved into the world of music, and the world of art. There is nothing wrong about life that we are living. The only wrong is in the fact that it is not spiritually guided or governed or supported. And here is where the first battle takes place. Let each one of you, sometime today or tonight, review within yourself whether or not you haven't had some resentments and antagonisms toward God, whether you haven't had questionings and doubtings toward God, whether you have really come into agreement with the Spirit itself. And for the most part, you'll find you have not come far enough into agreement so that there can be a full and complete surrender to the will of God. There still remains within us this something. It's mental. It's a resistance because the way of our world is not being supported by God. The will that we have for what we are doing in this world is not being supported by God, or perhaps the health that we have is not being supported by God. And the first step then that I would bring to your attention is loose this resentment or loose this doubt of God, loose this resistance to God through realizing that the only reason it exists is that you have outlined within yourself what you want God to do or how God is to respond within you. Of course, you know, you have heard it in classes, you have read it in the writings, that there is only one way to God, and that one way is prayer. There are many approaches to the subject of prayer. There are many spiritual approaches to the kingdom of God, but there is only one way in which everyone has to agree. Whether you approach God through an orthodox religion, a metaphysical, a spiritual, an occidental, or an oriental, you still have to approach God through prayer. Prayer is the only way. And so what each one of us must determine is, what is prayer? What is the prayer of a righteous man? What is efficacious prayer? What is the nature of prayer that brings a response from God? And the very first step is this one of surrendering our resistance to God. How shall we do this when it is so very evident that God is not responding to us? Let us give up the desire to have God respond to us, and the battle will be over quickly. In proportion as you can give up the desire to have God respond to you, will you find this resistance broken. The reason is this: God does not respond to anyone. God does not yield to anyone. God is not molded to anyone's desire or wish. And therefore, the very effort to get God to conform, to get God to do something for us, is the major barrier that separates us from God. When we can let go and let ourselves be resolved into God, not God to us, ourselves into God, you will immediately find not only that God is closer to you than breathing and nearer than hands and feet, you'll find that God is a loving presence that very quickly makes itself felt and known in our experience. I've witnessed this, that God does not announce itself, or perhaps it should be said, God cannot announce itself to those who have this desire to have God come to them. Let us understand our function. We are children of God, and therefore we should be as children in going to God, not seeking to tell the parents what is good for us, not seeking to make the parents do something for us, but as children who have confidence in their parents, enough confidence to turn to them in love, in faith, in confidence, and say, you surely know best. Guide me, govern me, feed me, and get into that intimate relationship with God, which is very personal. Even though God is impersonal, yet God is personal to us. If only we can yield ourselves to God and feel God as a divine influence within us that sometimes is very much like a loving parent, very much like the love that flows from a mother to a child. Strange that impersonal God should be so personal in relationship, yet it is so. To the human mind, God may seem to be abstract. God isn't abstract. Probably one of the best synonyms for God is self. Self with a capital S. Because that is really one of the great natures of God, a divine self, our divine self, my divine self, your divine self, that of you, which is greater than your present attainment, but equal to your dream of yourself. We, in the intimacy of this group, can acknowledge, confess, if you would like the word, that we have dreams, and that we have a dream of ourself. In other words, I know my inner self, and I know the depth of it, the breadth of it. I know its integrity. I know the depth of the love, the capacity for love that it has. I know the capacity for joy, for truth. The sad part is that humanly I have not been able to live up to my vision of myself, and nor have you. You have this vision. You know who you are and what you are. You know that there is a part of you that is divine. You know that there is a part of you that is infinite and immortal and eternal. You know more than this. You know that you have an infinite capacity for good. And part of the warfare is because humanly you cannot live up to the measure of what you know yourself to be. But we all have that in common. We all have that in common. We all know how far short we fall of our divine self. But remember that the reason we fall short is the divine self is God. And we haven't yet attained that state where we are so consciously one with God that we can say, as the Master often did, Thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me, for I and the Father are one. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the bread, the meat, the wine, and the water. I am this. He spoke of that when he ascended to that realm where Jesus and Christ had become one. Sometimes in our meditations, sometimes when we are engaged in treatment work for others, we also attain something close to that actual experience of oneness, divine oneness, in which the human self has disappeared and all that is left is the divine self, that which is God. These periods are brief and do not come as often as we would like them. But the very fact that you know that your self is spiritual, that you know that your self is divine, the very fact that you know that you are infinite pure being is that which will enable you to give up this warfare with God, this battle with God, and release yourself and relax yourself into that divine self which you are, that divine self which constitutes your being, and then you can trust it. Now, as you are compelled to look on your own problems, or in these difficult days, to look out at the problems of the world, instead of asking yourself, where is God, and what is God doing about this, instead of doubting that there is a God, or that peace and harmony could be restored, surrender yourself to the self of you and rest in it for its answer. Have you noticed this? Those of you who have ever asked anyone for metaphysical or spiritual help, have you ever noticed that you may have 100 friends and relatives who could not give you this help, yet here and there out in the world there is an individual, and if you have a cold or if you have a problem of any nature, some measure of harmony, and sometimes miraculous measures of harmony, are restored to you. And then you wonder, why can't 1,000 others do this? Why couldn't my relatives do this? My closest friends do this? And the answer always is, only those can bring spiritual harmony to your experience who have attained a measure of spiritual consciousness. In other words, it is the attained consciousness of an individual. It is the demonstrable spiritual consciousness of an individual that can bring spiritual peace and harmony where there has been discord and inharmony. Again, this points to the fact that as the Joel nature of us yields to the divine nature, it is the degree of that divine nature which Joel attains that becomes the spiritual light. And it isn't Joel, it's Mary, Bill, whoever you may be, or the world may be, because God is truly no respecter of persons. God is yourself. God is the divinity of your being, and it is not anywhere where you have to go for it, search for it, purchase it. It is within yourself, awaiting your recognition and the attainment of the realization of its presence. Now, when you know this, you know also that this divine self, which was the self of Jesus, of John, of Moses, of Buddha, this divine self is the divine self of you which you are recognizing when, in those moments, you do recognize that there is a part of you which is spiritual and perfect. There is a part of you which is divine. There is a part of you that is infinite in goodness. It makes no difference what you may humanly be doing today or yesterday or tomorrow. There is still that recognition that there is this divinity of you, this perfect you, this immortal and eternal you, this you that could say to the rocks, pour forth water, and it would be so. It could say to the storm, peace, be still, and it would be so. The more you contemplate this perfect self of you, this real self of you, this divinity of you, the closer you bring yourself into at one-ment with it. The more you bring yourself into intimate relationship with it, until you come, in a measure of course, to the place where the Master said, I can of my own self do nothing, but the Father within me doeth the works. Or Paul could say, I live, yet not I. Christ liveth my life. In other words, you come to that place of renunciation, of surrender, where you know right well now that that which is the external, the human of you, is becoming less and less and less, and that which is the divinity of you is becoming more and more and more. Only because there are moments in which you recognize how really great you are, only because there are moments in which you recognize how really sweet and real and true and perfect you are, only because of that can you have any hope at all for release from the problems of this world, because it is that part of you which can give you your freedom. It is that part of you which becomes the presence that goes before you to make the crooked places straight. It is that part of you which others recognize as your real nature. As it comes into the ascendancy, when you meet with the people of this world, they do not see your human nature to the extent that they formerly did. They become more and more aware of this divine nature that is within you. Now, you come to what is one of the most important steps on your entire spiritual path. You will learn now why you have been battling with God. You will learn that although you have stated over and over and over that the kingdom of God is within you, that you've really been fighting with the concept of a God up in the sky. You didn't know that that much orthodoxy was left in you. But now you discover that you were not resenting God or fighting God. You were fighting the concept of God that you have been entertaining all your life. And the reason this God doesn't do things is there is no such God. Now you come into the awareness why the kingdom of God is within me, not outside, and it must be released from within me. If I want peace on my earth, peace must flow out from my heart. If I want harmony, justice, equality, I can't any longer look to a God for it. I must express it. Know you, O Lord, that the whole secret of your discords and inharmonies has been the false concept of God that you have been entertaining, even while believing that you had made the transition to a metaphysical or spiritual basis of life. You still were expecting something of God that the world is expecting. A great deal of the world is in church today praying to that non-existent God for intercession in something that can't happen. It just cannot be. If there is to be peace on earth, it must flow out from us. And how? First of all, we are going to recognize that whatever peace is to be on earth must flow out from within us to the earth. Next, we must know that that peace can only flow in proportion to our recognition of the nature of God. Do you believe that God is a great power that can do something to other powers? Then you're praying amiss. You cannot help bring peace on earth. You will only bring peace on earth in proportion as you can look upon the evils of this world and say, thank you, Father, this is a mirage. This is not power. Whether that evil appears as a man, an ideology, a disease, a sin, still you in your inner self, when communing with yourself, must realize, just think, the kingdom of all power is within me, and it is all good. There is no power of evil in the divinity within me, nor within any individual on the face of the globe, for God is infinite and God is love. The evil that we have been fighting and that we have been desiring God to remove is non-existent. The evil exists only as a worldly concept in our thoughts. Once you begin to perceive the nature of God within you, you will soon see that there is no evil in you, and you will soon see that the evil beliefs that have governed you or controlled you are not power. They disappear just as darkness disappears when light is introduced. You know, we have had this brought to our attention before, that there is no such thing as darkness. There is no entity called darkness. When light comes, it doesn't move darkness out of the room, because there was no darkness in the room. There is no such thing as an entity called darkness, something that could be seen, heard, tasted, touched, or smelled, or analyzed under the glass. There is no such thing. There is no such thing as darkness. And you see that Scripture was able to reveal this many, many centuries ago, when it gave us this, that to God, light and darkness are the same. Think of this. To God, light and darkness are the same. There are no pairs of opposites. Jesus must have perceived this when he said to the woman taken in adultery, neither do I condemn thee, and to the thief on the cross, I will take you with me into paradise this night. Why? To God, sin and purity are the same thing. They are illusions. There is no one good. No one. Why callest thou me good? There is no me good. Then why callest thou me evil? There is no evil. That which we have considered to be good and that which we have considered to be evil are both alike to God. They're non-existent. That is why they can be metaphysically and spiritually healed, because they have no reality. They do not require probing. They do not require medication. They do not require surgery, because they exist only as images of thought. They exist only as a part of the illusion that has come upon us since we accepted the power of good and of evil. In the Garden of Eden there was no good and there was no evil, but the acceptance of good and evil destroyed the Garden of Eden. It removes us, too, from our harmony. But you can only learn in your meditation, you can only learn in your communion with God that evil is not real. And then watch it evaporate, dissolve, disappear from your experience, and after a while there will not even be the memory of it. You see, when we make the acknowledgement that in my humanhood I'm certainly not all that I should be, because I'm nowhere near approaching what I am in my spiritual nature. That's quite enough of a confession to make about the past. We can then leave the past and begin to commune with this Father that is within us, this Spirit that is within us, and by relaxing, and I mean relaxing desire, the desire to receive anything, the desire for anything, surrender these. You want nothing of God. To know Him aright is life eternal. So the most we can hope for or want is to know the nature of God. And this we can learn in our meditation. This we can learn within ourselves, because God quickly reveals it to us when there is no barrier to receptivity. And the barrier to receptivity is desire. The barrier to the receptivity of God, to communion with God, is entering a meditation with a desire. The only way that I can think of to illustrate this is the example of our sun and sunshine. We may go out into the sunshine to enjoy its warmth and its light, and we place our gardens where the sunshine will reach it, but we do not pray to the sun to come to our garden, and we do not pray to the sun to raise our crops. We do not ask the sun for warmth or light. We merely go out into it and accept it because it's available, it's universal. But God is much more so, for God is spirit, and God fills all space, so that we do not even have to go outdoors to find ourselves in God, although many people do find it easier when communing with nature to find their way right back through nature to God. But God is equally everywhere present, and the moment we can surrender that desire to receive of God, the moment we can surrender the wish to have God do something, you will find that you will relax into God and very shortly receive God's grace, whether in the form of messages or whether in the form of guidance or in the form of greater harmony in our affairs, but it comes. In all the years of this work, nothing has impressed upon itself upon me to the extent that this has, that when I can go within, completely free of desire, even the desire to see someone healed, even the desire to see someone supplied, just go within to receive that glow of the Spirit, that light of illumination, that feeling of warmth, of oneness, then I find it literally true that all things are added. Whether in my experience or those who are seeking help, the answer comes. But the answer comes in direct proportion to the ability to surrender the will, the desire. Think. God is yourself. And in those moments when you really are recognizing how wonderful you are in your real nature, you know those moments when you say, nobody understands me? That's a real moment, too. That's a real moment, and it's really true that no one understands us, because no one knows how really divine I am. And a lot of the times I don't know it myself. But when I do, I have my goal. And I know that only in proportion as I can bring myself into oneness with the divinity, the perfection that I already am, and surrender human desires, surrender human fears. Don't even allow yourself to speculate on what may happen tomorrow, as if it would make any difference. Thank heaven that Paul was able to reveal to us that neither life nor death can separate us from the love of God. Neither life nor death. And that experience of crossing over that comes to everyone eventually really makes no difference that it came to Jesus at 35 years of age. And the disciples, all of them probably before they were 50. It really makes no difference what the date is that we make that crossing, as long as we cross in the absolute conviction of our spiritual identity and of the fact that that which is the perfect of us is that which survives. Neither life nor death can separate us from the love of God or the life of God or the Spirit of God. And so where we make our home temporarily is not of too much importance. The vision that I would share with you today, which is the vision that I am seeing up here, give greater recognition to your perfect self and recognize that it is yourself. It is not some far-off God. It is not some being other than yourself. This divine, this perfect, this spiritual, which you feel and which sometimes you see and recognize within you, this is really you. And what you see in the mirror is only a human mind's distortion of that. And even the human conduct that we show to each other is a distortion of the really perfect that we are. And in the degree that we recognize this perfect self as our true being, in that degree do we mold ourselves into the image and likeness of it, into the pattern shown on the mount. Don't look out and up to a God to solve the problems of this world. Look to the center of your being, and then let love flow out. Love in the form of forgiveness. Forgiveness to all those who offend you, whether personally or nationally or internationally, and above all things, love in the form of praying for your enemies. The Master made it so clear that it profiteth you nothing to pray for your friends. If you would be children of God, and this means if you would be heirs of God and joint heirs to peace on earth, pray for your enemies. Pray for them. Pray that the spiritual light reveal itself in them. Pray that their sins be forgiven them and that they awaken in the true image that is within them. In teaching prayer, we were shown that if you go to the altar to pray, and there remember that any man has aught against thee, to get up, go first and make peace with your brother, and then return to the altar. This is really a pattern for prayer. Don't think for a moment that if you go into prayer, communion, meditation, and there are harboring enmity, that your prayer ever reaches the throne of heaven, even though the throne of heaven is right within you. First, make peace. In other words, pray. Pray for your enemy, forgive your enemy, get at peace with everyone in this world, and you will find yourself at peace with God. Then the Spirit of God can flow out through you to this world. While we are at home, I would like to continue these Sunday mornings with you for as long as you would like to have them. When you want to rest, just indicate it, and I'll take the hint. Otherwise, we are going to be here each Sunday morning, with the exception of September 10th, when we will go to Maui. But otherwise, we'll be here for your joy and mine Sunday mornings. Thank you. Thank you.